It sounds like one of the big distinctions philosophically is just that currently today we're in this reinforcement learning state of humans are involved in a lot of the process and improvement. And the exponential growth could potentially come from this self-learning that the machines are actually able to make themselves.
But that's what I'm telling you, that AI researchers have given the AI program self-learning over and over again. They have empowered their systems to self-learn. That's been a constant trick for decades. The problem is it just doesn't work very well yet. When they give the machines the ability to self-learn, their actual quality of doing so is bad. And that's why most of the improvements in systems haven't come from self-learning. They've come from humans, actually intentionally restructuring them and giving them more hardware and better algorithms and things like that. That's been how things have improved so far. But at some point, maybe they would get better at self-learning.
My understanding, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I thought GPT-4 did capture elements of self-learning to get there. And maybe the distinction is it was a small component versus a large one. But it's an interesting, that would be the exponential. If that were true, I guess, would you give more credence to, if self-learning were actually and self-improvement actually were possible, would you give more credence to these?
It is possible. It actually happens. It just doesn't do a very good job. That's the thing, right? You might say, like, can humans fly? Well, sort of. You can jump for a few feet, right? And we can fly by jumping for a few feet over and over again. And so in that sense, humans can fly, right? So don't talk about like giving humans the ability to fly. Talk about giving humans a better ability to fly. Yeah, we might flap our arms and fly around if we had a much better ability to fly. But that's not about just thinking, hey, let's think of the very idea of giving humans the ability to fly. That's about, can you find a way to make them actually good at it? So it's the same for the large language models, GPT things. They all actually do have ways to improve themselves. It just doesn't do very much. They're not good at it.
What would you do differently with the risks associated with AI currently, or is our current course and speed appropriate?
In my mind, the most obvious risk that is the most robust across a wide range of scenarios is the risk that most humans will lose their jobs. And we can actually do something about that. And so we should. And unfortunately, getting so distracted with all the other risks, I think, has detracted us from fixing the one thing we are most confident would be a problem and that we do know how to fix. So now, if AIs are very slowly displacing humans, like over centuries, then just the normal flow of people switching jobs and retiring and taking jobs, that would just naturally adapt to AIs taking more and more of the jobs. And eventually humans would just have wealth that they invested in the AI companies, and that's how the world would go. The risk is it might happen much quicker than that. So what if in a 5-year period or a 10-year period, we went from most adults working, and most adults mainly only the main wealth they have is their ability to work, to a time when less than 10% of adults work because computers are doing most of the jobs. And then what are they supposed to do as a replacement for their wages? That's a scenario that people are concerned about for many centuries for automation. It's actually not a crazy scenario. That is, it might go slow, but it could go fast. That's in a 10-year period. That's not a crazy time period over which this change might happen. And people are, in fact, at risk. That is, most people's wealth is pretty low compared to the present value of their future wages. That is, most of the wealth of people is I can earn wages, and that's why I can feed myself. Or my parents earn wages or whatever. So, but we can fix this by insurance. And in fact, much simpler insurance than what insurance companies usually offer would be fine. So if we're talking about the insurance, say for you to personally lose your job, now the insurance company has to, estimate your risks. They have to know about you and your inclination to get sick or your inclination to get lazy and your social connections and the kind of jobs you have and the kind of industry you're in, right? And so it's called underwriting to estimate your risk. And so for giving you personally risk about losing your job in general, then there's a lot of underwriting costs. And so you might not think that was worth the bother. Most people don't, in fact, insure against their risk of losing jobs, although we have some unemployment insurance that's provided by the government. But in this case, we have a scenario where basically most everybody loses their job all at the same time. So we don't really need to know about you in particular to give you the insurance. So I propose we could just take most any asset like a stock index fund or a real estate index fund, and we can just split it into two parts. That is, we can have the index fund if a certain event happen, and an index fund if a certain event doesn't happen, and the event can just be the adult labor force participation rate falls from, say, above 35% to below 10% within a 10-year period. And then if that happens, that's the signature. Robots took most people's jobs. And then you get this asset instead of someone who bought the other version. So that would be how you buy insurance. You buy these stock index funds and realize things conditional on this event happening. And because this event is not that likely, and it's what happened a long time off in the future, this will be relatively cheap. You buy basically insurance that if this happens, then you'll get some assets. And the people who buy the other side will buy them because they're cheaper, because they're willing to take this risk. So as long as there are people who are more vulnerable to this risk and people less vulnerable to this risk, there's room for gains from trade, where one side buys one, the other side buys the other, and now we're more insured against the risk. Now, many people think, but governments would deal with this risk. Surely if robots took all the jobs, the government would handle the problem, and so we shouldn't have to worry about it ourselves. Well, see, the problem is most governments, their plan is to tax the rich people in their district, in their area, and give the money to the poor people in their area, right? But this AI transition need not be equally spread around the world. So like the Industrial Revolution was concentrated in England and then Northern Europe, and the rest of the world didn't participate in it for a long time. So if your plan is when the robot revolution happens is to tax the rich people in your city or your state in order to help the poor people who lost their jobs, there may not be rich people in your state to tax much because the robot economy might have happened in a whole other continent. So that's why I think whatever insurance we set up needs to be global. And so this sort of asset I described would actually be a completely reasonable thing. Now, maybe your local government should buy a bunch of these assets so that when this happens, they can use that to help people out. But somebody should be buying these assets.
What do you make of the letter last week that a bunch of different people signed, Elon Musk among them, that we should pause for 6 months the development and let society kind of absorb the implications or at least think through the changes that are coming just from GPT-4 and some of the recent progress?
I mean, many people have commented, so I'm mostly going to repeat what other people said. First of all, it would just be really hard to enforce. Second, it would take away U.S. lead in this and give other nations time to catch up. But I think more importantly, there isn't just much that would happen in those 6 months, other than having proved the willingness to restrict the technology, which I think is the real purpose. The real purpose would be sometime in that 6 months, we make a proposal for more regulation and more limitations. And then we, lock it down more permanently. I think that's the actual plan. That is, I don't think we have after 6 months, we have much of a better idea how to regulate. Basically, I think people are thinking, look, we need to regulate this thing. That takes some time. It'll take time to put our political coalitions together, to get people behind some bills, to write out the language. We need time to make that happen. They want to regulate AI strongly, but they're not ready to now. And so they just want this pause period to set up that regulation so that by the end of the 6 months, they've got regulation passed that would extend it for indefinitely. They just want strong regulation indefinitely. And so do you want this industry heavily regulated? Then is the question. And, I'm an economist, and we have many ways that we think about regulation and many kinds of regulation that makes more versus less sense to us. But almost always regulation is a response to actual concrete, envisionable problems. Things that actually went wrong typically in the past, or that we believe went wrong. Here you've got just this vague, vast space of possibilities, and you want to empower someone to just block off the whole space because it looks scary. That just doesn't look like the sort of thing we've been good at in the past in terms of regulation. And honestly, there's enormous promise in this space. In many other areas of regulation, what we've often done is just blocked off whole areas of change and not allowed them, and then there's just no innovation in those areas. If you want to control and regulate actual systems that would exist, you have to allow them to exist for a while, and then try out things and experiment and evolve different variations.